Today's episode is sponsored by Crosscut Sewing. Located in Melrose, Massachusetts, or online at crosscutsewingco.com, Crosscut offers fun and modern fabric for all of your sewing projects. In addition to quilting cotton, Crosscut offers a wide variety of apparel fabrics like denim, chambray, jersey knit, canvas, corduroy, flannel, and more. Use the code WSN18 to save 20% on your next fabric purchase from Crosscut Sewing Company. Thank you so much, Crosscut. And now, here's the show. Welcome to episode 128 of the While She Naps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today, we're talking about building a career as an expert in the quilting industry with my guest, Ebony Love. An award-winning author and quilter, Ebony is recognized as one of the leading experts in fabric die cutting techniques. She's best known as the author of the Big Little Book of Fabric Die Cutting Tips and the featured long-arm columnist for Quilty magazine, though she regularly contributes to other magazines, videos, and television programs. She's fond of blindingly bright prints and takes a contemporary approach to traditional designs. Her website is lovebugstudios.com. Ebony Love, welcome.
Hi, Abby. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm excited to talk to you. So let's start off with your background. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Colorado, but I spent all of the summers of my youth in Louisiana. So I went from, blizzard conditions to ridiculously hot and humid on a regular basis.
Did your grandparents live in Louisiana?
Yeah, that's where my family is originally from. Both my parents were in the military, so we were based in Colorado. Louisiana is where all the family is. A lot of the family is spread now between Lake Charles and Houston and the Dallas area, but that's pretty much where all my family is, except for my mom, who is still in Colorado.
Okay, got it. And what branch of the military were your parents in?
Air Force.
Oh, wow. That's neat. And is that where they met?
That is where they met.
Okay, cool. And so Did you grow up like on an Air Force base?
Not really. So neither of them was career military, but they were both in during the Vietnam era. So my mom was an X-ray tech, and she was stationed at Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center, which is actually not there anymore. They that base closed, I think, in the 90s or the 80s, something like that. So that. I think it must have been the 90s. I'm forgetting how old I am. But that base isn't there anymore. But they were both, in the military. I was born right on that base. But I don't recall if we lived on base housing or if we were off base. But they were not career military, so it was a very kind of short-lived experience. I think anybody who's in during wartime does not relish staying in during wartime.
Right. Okay. I see what you're saying. But you stayed there and grew up there, and then you spent these summers in Louisiana. And were your family makers? Like, were they quilters, or were they sewing, or was that something that you grew up around?
It's interesting. I remember distinctly my aunt teaching me to crochet, and that was kind of the first craft, if you will, that I had. I think that my grandmother sewed. I remember her having a sewing machine, but it was always buried under laundry in the house. And so, as I'm sure, like I have a sewing machine here that's buried under laundry. It's one of my cabinet machines, and it's like an elliptical, it just turns into
totally
electrical, the treadmill, the sewing machine, those all get buried under laundry. But that's what I remember. I don't remember my grandmother sewing very often. And honestly, it's too hot to sew down there. But I remember my grandmother did sew the clothes. My mom had 5 sisters, so it was just a house full of girls. And so, at the time that they were growing up, making your own clothes was kind of the cheaper way to go than store bought. And so I knew that my grandmother sewed, but I don't have a distinct memory, unfortunately, of sewing with her. So I came to sewing through home ec classes. And I think my first project was a dinosaur. So I made a stuffed dinosaur. I made a letter of the alphabet. I think it was an E for my initial. And then I got into making heart-shaped pillows. So that was actually my first business. Around Valentine's Day, I would make these heart-shaped satin pillows and sell them to my classmates for Valentine's Day and Mother's Day.
Okay. So home ec class was in like junior high or middle school?
I think it started actually in elementary school. We were pretty young in home ec, and it went through middle school, but not high school. By the time I got to high school, there wasn't really home ec.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, but you did have it in school, which I think is, that's how I learned how to sew as well, was in home ec class. And, home ec is like a thing of the past now, which makes me so sad. But I think a lot of people I'm assuming you're around my age. I don't know if you mind saying how old you are.
Yeah, we are actually very close.
Okay.
We're both August babies.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're very close in age.
Okay, so I'm 43, so you're somewhere close to my age. So right, in our generation, we did still have home ec in school, which was a good thing, and so you had this little entrepreneurial streak in you even back then. So you would sew these little heart-shaped satin pillows and sell them around school around Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was very hilarious. And I remember getting so many orders at one point that I had to co-opt my mother, who does not sew. She does not have, I think her hobby is to not have any hobbies.
Uh-huh.
So that is like how far on the opposite spectrum she is from me. But I remember co-opting her to help me, because I kind of oversold my ability to sew these pillows.
Wow.
And, so she was down there sewing, and we would, because at the time I don't think I had necessarily the skill set. Like I knew how to make a template and cut the hearts out, and and sew the seam around and leave the hole for turning. But I didn't know how to sew the lace in, because they were all, I had lace around the outside edge, and I didn't know how to sew the lace in, because I think it was in like 4th or 5th grade, so I didn't know how to sew the lace into the seam. And so all the lace had to get attached by hand. So
oh my goodness. Yeah. And satin and lace are not the easiest materials to choose.
No. We had some very interestingly shaped, pillows in there, because obviously my ability to sew around a curve was also not that fantastic. But
right, the heart shape is also not the easiest shape if you're going to pick.
But you know what? When you're selling to other 4th graders,
right,
it's fine.
That's awesome. Yeah, my friends and I, we used to sell scrunchies. That was the big, hair accessory, homemade hair accessory. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. A little bit of a that would have been smarter to do something smaller.
There's a lot of room for error in a scrunchie. It can kind of like be really wonky, and it's good. It's all fine. You can just hide that seam, and it's all fine. Okay, so you went on to get a degree in engineering, which is, I think it's probably it's somewhat unusual for girls, and maybe a little bit unusual for women of color to get a degree in engineering. And I wondered if you felt really encouraged in math and science where you were growing up, or were you sort of were you sort of alone in deciding to go and do this? Or did you have a particular teacher or somebody who was like, believed in you and sought you out to go and pursue this degree, or how did that come about?
Yeah. So I think, I'd have to say that, I'm probably an engineer because of my mother. But, she was always a very strong advocate for education. And I think, looking looking back at kind of the life that she had in, growing up in Louisiana in the house that they had, I think that house was like a 2-bedroom house, 1 floor, 6 girls, 2 parents, there, 1 bathroom, no shower, it was a bathtub, so somehow you have to get, 6 girls ready who were all pretty close in age. So I think growing up that, she just had a lot of, and Louisiana is still a very, very poor, area. And when industry kind of, is pretty big for like oil and gas and, industry down there. And when that economy sort of collapsed down there, like it's a very poor, even statewide, it's a pretty poor, state. So kind of growing, just kind of thinking through that, I think my mom knew that, either the military or education was kind of the way out. And so she was always a really strong advocate for me to get a very good education. And so she was never, she never took the attitude that like girls can't do math or, girls aren't good for science. She just, whatever I had an aptitude for, she really encouraged that. So I think in school, I was kind of equally good at math and science and kind of the more, liberal arts, English and, drama, those types of things. And so I actually wanted to go to Juilliard and pursue a music degree. And my mom was, her attitude was they don't call it starving artist for nothing. And so I think, her position was, go and get an education where you can actually earn a steady income, and you can always do you can always have the artistic pursuit. So, so kind of when I was making that decision about what I was going to do, and where I ended up was at Columbia, which has a dual degree program with Juilliard. And I didn't look enough into it. It was actually a dual degree program with the college and not with the engineering school. But I thought I was going to figure out how to solve that, solve that problem where I could go to Juilliard and be an engineer.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, that kind of didn't happen, but that's what I wanted. I wanted the best of both worlds. So,
right. Okay. Right. I see. And so do you think she was right in the end? I mean, now you're a grown up and you do have an artistic, and we'll talk all about your artistic career, which sort of is alongside of your engineering career and sort of, happened and not through the music. I mean, you're a multi-talented person. If you wanted to have a Juilliard career as well, what music do you play?
I was a soprano singer, so I knew I was going to be a star.
Wow, you are super talented. Okay, so and did you apply to Juilliard as well?
So I went to, the way that it worked is you go to you have to go for 3 years, and then you apply for the dual degree program and then, and get in. So I didn't apply to both at the same time. I actually applied to, I just applied to university.
I see.
And then Juilliard was like the next thing.
I see. Okay. Yeah. And so now that you're a grown up and you do have an artistic career, although as we said, it's different. Do you think she was right? Like, you're able to earn, with a specialized engineering degree, but you didn't end up pursuing that dream. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think as much as I hate to admit it, I think, my mother was probably right. Darn. But let's be honest, making money in the arts is a very challenging thing to do. Just from, if you look at sports, like not everybody is going to get that opportunity to reach that elite level. And if you're not elite in a sport, if you're not elite in music, if you're not elite in, whatever artistic pursuit you have, there isn't there isn't a lot of middle ground. You're either, struggling, or, or you're a millionaire, in a lot of these, kind of pursuits. So I think making money in the arts is a challenge. Now, of course, that doesn't have to be someone's only motivation. Money is not everything. I think that being an engineer and working for, Fortune 500 companies has its own sort of stressors and stress levels and complications. And I've actually had, I had the opportunity to live both sides. I worked full time for, quite a while I pursued my business on the side. I had an opportunity to leave corporate America and pursue my art business full time. And recently I made the decision to actually go back to work. So I'm sort of in a transition period, sort of making that decision. But it's quite a challenge, I think, in the business that we're in, to find enough streams of revenue to make it work. And a lot of what we do as crafters and artists and quilters is, a lot of it relies on, you're relying on other people having a feeling that they have enough disposable income that they're willing to part with it to you, versus, working in an industry that's a little bit more durable, like everybody wants to eat. I work in consumer packaged goods, so everybody has to eat, so that's pretty stable, versus, being in the quilting industry like I am has its ups and downs, its expansions and contractions and things. And having a strong economy is very, not to get too deep, but, there's a lot of factors that, that cause pressure on the creative arts. So it can be very challenging to support oneself, especially if you are, single and, sole breadwinner, having to keep yourself in food and clothing and all of that. So not to get too deep and depressing, but,
No, I mean, I think
it's a challenge.
Yeah, no, I think it's a challenge too. And it's a challenge not even if you're single, but also if you are supporting other people, in your family, and have to provide, for example, health insurance for multiple family members, or are a caregiver, so there's a lot at stake, and no matter who you are, really. So, and it can be very stressful, either way. So, okay. So I do want to dig a little bit, more into that. So you had a day job for a long time. And I know you mentioned you were working for a consumer packaged goods company. And just to clarify, that's kind of like, so explain what consumer packaged goods is. It's kind of like a food industry, right? Is that? Okay.
Yeah, it's a food industry. It's basically like the middle section of your grocery store.
Okay. So like Cheez-Its or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Just so people have an image in their minds of what is that? All right. And so you were working for a big company like that, doing IT, and you had that day job as you were building a quilting, business at the same time, Lovebug Studios at the same time. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how you started to build that business. So you talked about, as growing up, you didn't really quilt necessarily, but then your friends started having babies, and you decided to make a quilt for some of them. And is that the way that you sort of got into quilting?
Yeah, that's exactly how I got into quilting. It was, I wasn't really a quilter. I mean, certainly I had, I did a lot of, garment sewing and home deck, and what I used to do with the, these, when I was making those, satin hearts are kind of funny shapes. So you end up with these funny shaped scraps. And I used to, stitch the scraps together, but I wouldn't make quilts. I would make, accessories like handbags and, hair things and, hats and, jewelry or, shrugs or capes, or, I would stitch those things together. So, or, more pillows, from assembled, fabric from the scraps. So, but I was never a quilter until friends started having babies. And I think a lot of people get into quilting sort of through that through that life cycle.
Yeah, I have found from talking to people, I would argue that most people who begin quilting through some sort of life cycle event.
Yeah. It's like you have to have a purpose. Like I don't know anybody who just, sort of wakes up one day and goes, I think I'm going to make a quilt.
I think it happens
I'm
every
sure
now and then, but a lot of
Yeah.
times it's like someone's having a baby or some sort of special event is happening. Someone's getting married and they want to commemorate that special occasion in their lives. And a quilt just seems to call to them. And so they decide they're going to learn to do this. And that's the beginning.
Yeah. And it actually was not my intention to have a quilting business. I made a quilt and I took it to the baby shower, and it was an alphabet quilt. So, it's basically, all applique, all different. It's funny because I tell people now I'm not a scrap quilter at all, but that was definitely a scrappy quilt. So all the letters were made from different fabrics, and I appliqued them on and you put them to squares. It was a very symmetrical design because I'm an engineer. I do grid work. That is that is who I am. And I take it to this baby shower, and I'm just thinking, I just made this quilt. Not that I just threw it together. Hey, I'm going to spend a couple hours, working on this quilt, but I was just thinking, this is something handmade that I made for my friend. And the reaction at the baby shower was just like, oh my gosh, where did you get that? And when I said I made it, everyone was just so amazed. They're like, you should sell those. And that is like that's like the worst.
I know. We've all heard it, right? Like, you should sell those. And you're like, that took me 100 hours, but okay.
That was the absolute worst sentence you could have said to me because I took it seriously. And not that you can't sell quilts, but, selling quilts is just its own sort of special category that I eventually found out.
I want to take a minute now to talk to the owner of Crosscut Sewing Company, today's episode sponsor. Here's Stephanie.
My name is Stephanie Thiessen, and my business is Crosscut Sewing Company. Crosscut Sewing is a fabric shop and sewing studio located in Melrose, Massachusetts. We have a variety of sort of more fun and modern quilting fabric from manufacturers like Cotton and Steel, Art Gallery Fabrics, Robert Kaufman, Free Spirit, Andover, and Moda. In addition to quilting cotton, we offer a variety of apparel fabrics like denim, chambray, jersey knit, canvas, corduroy, rayon, and flannel. We also have a classroom, and sewists can rent the classroom by the hour and come and work here. We also sort of have a focus on teaching beginners to sew, and that's beginners of all ages. We like to empower new sewers to build a lifelong relationship with sewing. We want it to be fun and not frustrating, so we have everything here that you would need to take a class or come and sew in the shop. So you don't have to bring anything if you want to come here. We have an after-school program that runs 4 days a week. Our adult classes are sort of an open format. So people work on different things and learn from each other and use machines that they might not have at home, like sergers and cover stitch machines.
And how did you come to open a fabric shop? Because I think it's so many people's dream to open a fabric store. So it's always interesting to hear how somebody actually did it.
So it's kind of a funny story. I was a graphic and web designer, and I was working from home. And with my extra time, I would make things and sell them online, like on Etsy and craft fairs and things like that. So then I started buying fabric wholesale, and then I had extra fabric, so I sold the fabric online as well. And then I really started focusing on that. So I started as an online-only business a few years ago, and then it was in November of 2016 that the business was big enough to move into a retail space and start teaching as well. We are at 200 Green Street in Melrose, and online we are at crosscutsewingco.com. The coupon code is WSN18, and that will take 20% off of fabric.
Thank you so much, Crosscut Sewing. And now back to my conversation with Ebony.
I started taking commissions from people, so it was initially, people at that baby shower sort of, putting in their orders. And I actually got, I remember going to an event. So, these, when you're in corporate, anytime somebody has like an awards ceremony or something like that, like the corporation will like buy a table at the event. And so I got to take up a seat at one of those tables, and I ended up sitting next to a vice president, and he was asking me, what do I do in my spare time? I was talking to him about this, the quilt making that I did. And then he wanted to order one for his goddaughter, who was from China. And so he wanted something that was like really meaningful for her. So I started researching, Chinese characters and, which province she grew up in and all of these things. But that was like my first like really major commission, because it was like, oh my gosh, I think I charged them like $700 for this twin size quilt, which don't do that. Not for like this super, custom kind of thing. But, but that was like my first major commission. I was like really excited because, hey, this guy's a vice president. He's, I'm like, I'm on my way to Oprah.
Right.
Kind of a thing. All I have to do is, sell, 400 more of these and I'll be set.
Right.
Kind of a thing. So anyway, but that's how I kind of got into it, was sort of taking commissions. And that's how Lovebug Studios started, was actually as like a commissioned quilt making business.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So you were in business, back to that same entrepreneurial bent from grade school, taking commissions, a little bit in over your head, making stuff for other people.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Back there. And, but that's cool. And then you discovered die cutting, and I kind of love this story. I stumbled upon this story in researching your background, and I thought it was just super charming. So now people kind of think of Ebony Love and they're like, Ebony Love's the die cutting queen. Like, you're sort of known as the person who's the expert about die cutting. And in like the die cutting Facebook groups, people sort of turn to you as the expert, but that was not always the case. And explain the very first sort of die cutting, the very first die, and how you came to get it and what it was for, and that story.
Yeah. So here's what happened. So I mentioned, taking commissions and things like that. So, how do you get word of mouth out there? So I decided to start doing craft shows. And, the outdoor shows where you bring your own tent and, set up your little 10 by 10, space. And when you're at a craft show, you have to have a variety of things to sell. And so I started, and because I'm an engineer, I know that if you're going to sell things at a craft show, you need to have like volume, essentially. You have to have things for people to choose from. You need to have different price points. And so I was brainstorming and trying to figure out like, what could I make that would be really quick to make, and but that I could put at a reasonable price point but still make a profit. So pulled out my spreadsheets and did all these things. And so I came up with this idea to do, and I tell everybody, this is my $1 million idea and you're welcome to take it. Ideas are free. So I always put this out here. I've never seen anyone take me up on this, but my idea was to have, to make fabric fortune cookies. And the twist is that they turned into coasters. So they were like dual purpose. And I actually found like these Chinese takeout containers that were clear. And so I had, these, so you get like a pack, you could order a 6-pack or a 4-pack of these fabric fortune cookie coasters. But if you know anything about fortune cookies, they start with a circle. So cutting circles was very important. And when you're cutting a circle out of fabric, I actually had a layer of fabric and a layer of felt, because you need something to sort of keep the moisture from messing up the table, right? So felt was like my, they didn't have cork fabric at that time that I was doing this. So the felt was actually kind of the barrier. But the thing about circles is it's very difficult to hand cut circles. So I started looking around for different tools for cutting circles. And so I tried everything on the market. I tried acrylic templates. I tried, circular compass like rotary cutters. I tried just all different sorts of things, and nothing nothing worked. And then the other challenge was that I needed to finish the edge. And so, stitching around them and turn them inside out is very time consuming. Stitch around, turn it inside out, finish the, close it, top stitch it. That's very time consuming. So it was very important that the edge be sort of self-finished. So pinking the edges was very important. And I took a pair of pinking shears and tried to cut through the layer of felt and the layer of fabric. And I had these just bright red bruises on my hand. If you've ever held a pair of pinking shears and tried to cut anything, it's brutal. It's pretty brutal. And so I just was searching on the internet, trying to find some way for me to produce these pinked edge circles in a faster way. And I found this company that said they could make a custom steel rule die. And I had no idea what a steel rule die was, but it sounded like the thing, like that sounded like the solution. So I called them up, talked to them a little bit about what I wanted. It was a 5-inch circle with a pinked edge. They sent me a drawing. It was fantastic. I was just very excited. And, this is something that people kind of learn about me as they get to know me. But I'm very much like, if I have an idea about something, I just take it and I run with it. So no, I didn't do any research about whether anybody wanted these fabric fortune cookies or whether it's a good idea or not. It was just, I had the idea. I have a way to execute it. Let me go ahead and do that. I get this die in. So the company makes the die, and the die comes in. I'm so excited. I open it up. It looks great. Problem is, I don't know how to use it. So I call the company and I'm like, this is so great. How do I use it? And so their response was, well, you use it. You need a die cutter. And I was like, well, what's a die cutter? So that was my entry into being the fabric die cutting expert. I knew nothing.
So you ordered a die, but you didn't order a die cutter.
I didn't order a die cutter. I didn't even know what that was. And so, but somehow, like, I don't know what I thought, like, maybe I thought like you just pressed it down like over the rotary mat and it was going to be sufficient, Right. And so I don't know what I was thinking, but what I knew is that they could make me the thing that was going to be the answer to my problem. But I didn't really, so this goes back to like the whole, I took it and run with it. It's like they said they could fix it for me. So yeah. And I kind of took a bath on that because at the time you could only get custom dies made for one machine, and it was the Big Mama. And if you were trying to get ready for a craft show, like you're not sitting there waiting for a sale, right? So I paid full price for everything, there, but I got exactly what I wanted. And kind of the funny thing is, like, after that first craft show, I was over the fabric fortune cookie.
Right. So you did not become the fabric fortune cookie queen. That's not your signature product.
I did not. And there were fortunes. I wrote all the fortunes that went into the fortune cookies. So, it was, but somebody's going to make $1 million for them.
I think you need to make them and give them out at the end of your classes that you teach, just like give one to everyone.
That is such a good idea. I should totally do that because I tell this story.
I'm sure you tell this story, and I just feel like at the very end, on the way out, parting gift, with the fortunes and them. That's so sweet. I mean, it is a cute idea. So, like, why not just go with it? Since you have the die. Well.
But you know what? I could say that was an expensive lesson, but it was a path to a career. Because what I quickly realized after, and it wasn't just the fabric fortune cookies, but, honestly, if you go to a craft fair and try to sell a quilt for the time and effort that you put into making it, you find out pretty quickly that people are not, they're kind of disdainful about, you charging a certain price for, and I make the distinction craft versus art. I did a lot of craft fairs. And honestly, the quilts that I make, while there's an artistic vision behind it, I wouldn't go so far as to call them art quilts. So it's like they're different markets, and the craft fair market is not about paying fair rates for handmade quilts. So, so I learned pretty quickly that unless I was seriously going to be Oprah's quilter, I wouldn't be able to make money, make a profit, if you will, off of selling, quilts one at a time. And so that's what started me thinking, kind of two tracks. Like one is, how do you create passive income or ongoing revenue? And that is, not through this one-to-one interaction, it's a one-to-many interaction. So that's how I kind of got into pattern making or pattern design, is that, trying to create that I only have to do this once and I can sell it multiple times versus creating something specific for one person and not being able to do that, ongoing. So that was one track. And then, I think the thing that really put me on the market was this book, The Big Little Book of Fabric Die Cutting Tips. And that kind of stemmed from, another one of those, get an idea and run with it. But that book was really just a result of me participating in these online communities. And as these die cutters were getting more and more popular, for quilters, because I was doing a lot of experimenting. And I remember when I first got into it, obviously I didn't know what I was doing, but there wasn't a lot of information out there about how to use these things for quilting. And one of the
die cutters were originally made for scrapbooking. I mean, who are they? Who is the original market for them?
So the original market was actually the education market.
Okay.
So schools, like all that bulletin board stuff.
Right.
And so it's funny, like as a kid, all that bulletin board stuff, like it's magical, you come into school and it'll be just completely different. And, being the person picked to help the teacher with the bulletin board, with the open stapler, that was like you're like king of the hill, then, but that's really where the die cutting, that was like the first market was education. And then when scrapbooking sort of hit stride, like in the 70s and 80s, that's when, that's when die cutters sort of took a different approach. And it was more, not so much home use, but more like create places where like you'd have these scrapbook stores with the paper and the, and the huge collections of dies. And it was like a destination. So you would actually, go and scrapbook at the scrapbook stores. And then, they would be, you would actually get die cut pieces, right? It wasn't like, the idea wasn't that the home person would cut their own shapes. You would go to the scrapbook store and you would get, you get the beach ball and the
right. So it was almost like a communal use. Like the scrapbook store would invest in this big machine that was pretty expensive. And so you would go, with friends or something like that, or, by yourself and spend some time there, like, on a weekend or at an evening and cut these shapes and stuff like that. So that's how you would get them. And then at a certain point, they made them maybe smaller or more affordable or something like that. And they became something that people bought for home. And was that because of quilters?
That was not because of quilters. That was the scrapbook craze.
Okay.
So, scrapbooking, was, it was just so huge. And I think somebody saw the opportunity to where, they could make a lot more money putting it into homes rather than, having it just be this destination place and, kind of, instead of selling the shapes, why don't we just sell the product in the machine? So, so the die cutters got smaller. They started getting adapted for home use. And so it was scrapbooking, jewelry making, crafting, that kind of stuff. So quilting came, a lot later. Not that you couldn't cut fabric with those machines, but I think at the time, the rotary cutter was the thing.
Right.
That was the revolution in quilting, was the rotary cutter. So, so it's kind of interesting to see, like, within this crafting space, that these evolutions sort of happened at different times. So I think the quilting part, probably was, 90s, 2000s is when, that kind of aha moment. I believe it was 2005. Was when the Go got introduced. The Studio, which is the cutter that I first had, I think that had been around since like the mid 90s. I want to say, for targeted for quilting. So, and I think that the resurrection of quilting. What was that? Late 70s.
Yes, around the bicentennial. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, it took a little
while. Right.
Yeah. It took a little while for somebody to kind of get that aha moment. and at the time, that the studio came out, like the studio was a huge piece of equipment. So again, this wasn't necessarily something that, a lot of people had. It certainly required a lot of investment. That machine today retails for, $600. So, it wasn't, and the dyes aren't cheap, so it wasn't something that everybody, that everybody had. You had to have a kind of a certain level of commitment, a certain level of income to do that until the machines, got smaller and, cheaper and got produced overseas and those types of things. So, so that kind of went through an evolution
Right.
there.
Okay.
But,
and so you were in these, like Yahoo groups and later Facebook groups for people who were sort of getting into this and were sharing information and were, trying to figure out how to use them and what to do with them and what worked best. And, but the information seems sort of scattered, right? Because, those groups aren't necessarily set up as like really organized message boards and that kind of thing. And so, and so that was sort of the impetus to put it all together.
Yeah. And I remember that, kind of this distinct moment where, anytime you're in a group, and this happens, everywhere, I'm sure you've seen this online as well, but anytime you're in a group and you've been there for a period of time, you're no longer the newbie. You're like the experienced person. So you've heard every question. And what was happening in this group is that every day, a new person would have purchased a machine, or a group of new people would have purchased this machine, and they find these groups online and they come to the groups and their question is, how do I use this? They're at the time, YouTube is huge now, but that wasn't, it wasn't huge when I first, I think was it 2010, 2011, when I first started making videos? Like it was there, but it wasn't this, huge thing. There wasn't all of this technology support for all these channels. And so there wasn't a lot of places that you could go to get this information. And I think the company too was still kind of getting their legs under themselves. And so they didn't really do educational types of videos. They did more like sales videos.
And is this AccuQuilt?
This was AccuQuilt, yeah. Okay. So, so when they were, selling that product, like people would get these machines and not know what to do. And so every day you get the same question: well, how do I use this? What do I do? And after a while, some of the ladies on the group were getting kind of salty, like because when you see the same question over and over and over again, day in and day out, that can be a little bit irritating. And so I just remember this one like conversation where somebody just had enough, and they're like, my goodness, will you just at least search before you ask this question? Because somebody asked this question yesterday and the day before, and we keep answering it. So why don't you just search before you keep asking the same questions that we hear over and over? And that's really, not an attitude for that can be very off-putting for a new person. And so my response back, I had to respond to that thread and say, you know what, I remember being new. And I remember not knowing, you don't even know the language. How do you know what to search for if you don't even know the language of what you're asking about? And if you don't know what a die cutter is, and, that it's actually a steel rule die, and how,
right.
What things are referred to, if you don't know the terminology, how are you going to search? And, and it's not like these groups were like you were saying, they're not super well maintained, that they're not archived and organized and researched and all those things. And so I said, if you really want to be helpful and want to stop getting those questions, why don't you start a file with the common questions? And we can just point new people to that when they join. And then, we can sort of reduce this sort of initial churn of hearing the same question over and over and over again. And, I waited a couple weeks. And, there's like radio silence, right? Like you ask somebody, why don't you do it? And so I was like, fine, I'll do it. So, and that's how I got the book. I actually went back and I spent weeks going all the way back to the beginning of that group. And I read every single post in that archive, and I organized those posts, information and not organizing on the group, but just organizing it in terms of like, okay, here's the topics that need to be covered, and, all of these things. And, certainly the learnings that I had, to contribute to it. And it was too big for a frequently asked question. So I wrote a book instead.
And that book was self-published?
It was. I actually did a Kickstarter.
You did a Kickstarter for it. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I did a Kickstarter for it because it's a very niche. I mean, honestly, die cutting for quilting is like a niche within a niche within a niche within a niche. So the market for that book at that time, I was like, and I did approach a couple of traditional publishers, but nobody wants to publish a reference book. And that's what I wanted to put out there was a reference manual. For this equipment. So you had all that information.
Did you ask AccuQuilt about it? Did you go to them and say, I'm going to create a book that shows quilters how to use your machines and your dies?
Yeah, I did. And I think, initially, and this is, this industry is so small.
It is so small.
So some of these things, and I'm also a very strong advocate of intellectual property. And so what happened was, I went to, and because initially I only knew AccuQuilt. That was the only company that I knew that made, dies, because I came into this from the quilting angle and not from the scrapbooking education side. So I actually, and I had no experience or exposure to these, kind of to this world. I knew the cutter that I had and, that I had been using. And so my book originally was going to be just covering the AccuQuilt cutters, so I had talked to them a little bit about what I was doing. And I actually went to a spring quilt market, and my book I was going to publish the book in June. And I went to spring quilt market and I walked down this aisle and I walked back and I was standing in front of Sizzix. And I was like, what's a Sizzix? It actually blew my mind that there was something else.
But there was there was a competitor.
There was that there was a competitor, but not just a competitor, that there's like this whole other world of, there isn't just one company in this, in this market. Cause, the group that I was in was actually, the online group. It was for, I think the group name was like AccuCut Quilters. Like it was like, it is very, very focused on that. And there wasn't anything else. So the world was pretty small. And so that spring market just opened my eyes. And so I got to talking to them about, I was like, who are you? And like, what is this? And I've never heard of a Sizzix, and what is this and what do you do? So they showed me around, they showed me how their machines work. And at that moment, I recognized that if I'm going to put out a reference book to educate people, so they didn't have the same experience that I did, that I needed to understand the whole market and not just this one piece of it. And so and when you independently publish, you can make these kinds of decisions. So I actually delayed the publication of the book so that I could learn about Sizzix. So I actually spent that summer, and Sizzix was super great. They sent me, they're like, pick, circle what you want in the catalog and we'll send you the Big Shot Pro, and, we'll just get you situated. And they were super, super supportive, of that. And, they have always been like super open and super encouraging and just very, very great partners to work with. And I think at that moment that, it was probably not exactly at that moment, but by me making that decision to open up my world to other cutters, it changed the relationship that I had with AccuQuilt. And so it was not
exclusive.
It's not exclusive. And if you look at their business model, honestly, and this isn't, everybody's got different business models, but you look at their business model, their, Go Line is a proprietary system. It's a closed system. When they make licensing agreements with, their, when they do licensing deals, it is a closed system. There is no room from a marketing strategy for other, so making that decision to open up my book to other possibilities, sort of, it changed my relationship with them. And it was no longer, sort of this, because I was just like, let's educate. I don't care what cutter they use. Like, let's tell people, I'm like really excited about, let's tell people about how great die cutting is and look at all these, options that I didn't even know was possible. that were options. And so that's, kind of, at that point, it wasn't a possibility to publish the book through, using AccuQuilt as a resource to publish that book. And frankly, not doing it for Sizzix either, because anytime you're trying to create relationships, it's a delicate balance of, everybody is great in the industry. We're all friends, it's all fantastic. But when you are working with competing manufacturers, it's a delicate balance to sort of walk that line to try to be perfectly neutral. And if you're going to do that, then, it can be sometimes challenging to get sort of universal.
Right.
Universals. So I've been fighting that battle for,
no, I imagine you have. And I think that, I think it says a lot too, that you decided to keep going. I mean, I think that there's a certain, there's a certain feeling of discouragement where you walk down the aisle at Quilt Market and you see this competitor and you think to yourself, I'm nearly finished with this project. I'm about to publish. And I just discovered this whole other thing that I now, and really in order to do this right, would need to stop the train and write and learn about this entire other thing. And that's just too overwhelming and just throw in the towel. You know what I mean? I think that it would have been easy to do that and it would have been a huge loss. So to be able to have the sort of grit to say, I'm going to hang in there. I'm going to pause. I'm going to learn, and I'm going to delicately balance between these two brands and still publish this book. That requires a lot of perseverance. And so, And so I just think that, kudos to you for keeping going. And figuring it out. So I'm sure you have been walking that line for a long time. And just to finish up the conversation about Sizzix, so I know that you also have a line of dies that you created or and then funded with a Kickstarter as well. And that was a big dream of yours, was to have your own dies that you designed, that cut, a custom shape that creates quilt blocks that you designed. And that's something that, as you said, these different companies have licensing deals with designers so that they can create custom dies for their own designs. And that's something that both of these companies do. And so I'm just curious, I saw that there was a Kickstarter, and then I saw that you actually had them with Sizzix as well. And so I was a little confused there, and I wondered if you could enlighten us on that.
And it was kind of interesting, that was another line that I had to sort of draw. And the thing to understand is that I have a different arrangement with Sizzix than any other designer has. And so when I tell you that, they have been really open to trying different things and, doing things in different ways. And what was really important to me, and what I was actually trying to do, was not have a licensing deal, because I am, first I think of myself as an educator, as a consumer advocate. And it was very challenging to sort of make the decision that I'm going to pick a company, or pick a format. That was a very hard decision to make. And actually what I was trying to find was a manufacturer for dies. There's not many factories that, that make dies. But the challenge that I had, because remember, I just jump into things, right? But becoming a manufacturer and importer of goods was that was a little bit too far for me. And so I went to Sizzix and I said, you guys, you manufacture, dies, you have, your production schedule. Is there a way that we could work out that I could get production time on your lines to produce these? And so I have a manufacturing agreement with Sizzix. My line of dies are not in their catalog. They don't have inventory. I have all of the inventory. So it's a very different arrangement than you get as a licensed designer, which is more like, you license your name and your likeness and your, your logo, and, you get royalties from sales. This is, I am the distributor essentially for my line of dies. So
I see. Okay.
So yes, they have the Sizzix name on them. And the way that I look at that is, sure, I absolutely could have, found an independent factory and gone through, all of those, loopholes and, work and, taking on the packaging and responsibility for, getting them, on the water and clearing customs and all of those things. And the advantage of working with a company that has a trusted name in this business is that I get to take advantage of the fact that they have like their own QC process, right? Because my dies are co-branded, if there's something wrong with the dies, I can, go back to Sizzix and, say, make a claim, quality claim, kind of a thing. So, there's a quality check process, that goes through. I can kind of take advantage of, them. They have, CAD designers who, they know all this stuff. So I don't necessarily have to send them completely perfect drawings. I can send them an idea and, and work through the layout and all of that stuff with them. So to me, there was an advantage of having that relationship. But at the time that I launched the Kickstarter, it was not a signed agreement. And so I couldn't just come out and say,
right,
I'm getting dies with Sizzix. It was, I'm in the process of getting a line of dies manufactured is kind of the, the approach that I took. So yeah, a lot of people were confused by that, especially when they saw the packaging. They're like, but these are Sizzix dies and why, what just happened? And, so it was really just the being able to cut through the noise a little bit. Cause I think if I had, sort of gone down the path of becoming an importer and a manufacturer of these things and finding my own factory in China to do this. I actually tried to do it in the United States, and it was I couldn't get the price and the volume to correspond to what I needed to get to. So it's all a numbers game, right? I can't come out with a die that has a retail price of $200, right?
Right.
Nobody's going to pay for that. Or very few people would pay for that. I have a couple of people, very close friends that I'm sure
yes.
wouldn't mind.
I'm working right now on an article about the trade tariffs, and this is very much center of mind for me. So I totally hear you. Okay, but that totally explains that. And so I know you had mentioned that you've recently gone back to work, but I know you're still going strong with Lovebug Studios, and we didn't get a ton of time to talk about some of the cool things that you do with your quilt-alongs and some cool. You've got lots going on. So I wanted to make sure that you have a chance to talk about what's coming next.
Yeah, so I've got a few sort of teaching engagements coming up. So I'm teaching for the first time at Wisconsin Quilt Expo. And I did a Facebook Live the other day in one of my groups and, was saying like, this is the first year of, Quilt Expo without Nancy Lehman. And so it's sort of bittersweet for me to sort of have my first teaching engagement, and it's the year that she is not with us. So that's kind of, that's kind of coming up in a couple of weeks. And so that's kind of very poignant for me. Personally, I never got to go on her show, but it's just kind of like, yes, I get to teach at Quilt Expo, which was very highly connected to Nancy. So that's coming up. I've got some classes at both Fall Quilt Market and Fall Quilt Festival. So I've got some business classes as well as some die cutting classes. So that should be pretty fun. Everybody's asking me when is the edited, the second edition of, Big Little Book coming out. It's coming. I know I've been saying that for a little while, but one thing about being an independent publisher is you get to set the publishing schedule, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing. So yeah, it's coming. It's on my head and at my desk to finish up those edits. I've got a fabric line coming out in the spring with Island Batik.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. That's I have to say that wasn't on the bucket list, but when the opportunity came, I was like, okay, that's on my bucket list now.
It is now. Right.
So I kind of feel like it's like I actually have like a full, I've got you from soup to nuts, right? I've got the fabric, I've got tools, I've got dyes, I've got, patterns, and, the classes online and the class in person. So yeah, but it's definitely now that I am back working, I've got to start making some decisions about where do I pull back, because certainly when you're doing this full time, you can do a lot more things than if you have sort of a limited, amount of time. So I think that's going to be a challenge for me, is to figure out what do I cut back on? Where do I sort of, pull back? So maybe I'm not teaching in person as much anymore, or, maybe I only do fabric lines once a year, or, something like that. So, I have to see like what impact that's going to have. But certainly, yeah, I still do the online mystery quilts. We're doing Northanger Abbey. So I've started my ostentatious mystery quilt adventure, and that's AUSTEN, ostentatious.
Nice.
So I'm actually doing a whole mystery quilt series, and we're kind of working our way through the Jane Austen books. So started with Northanger Abbey. We're using a beautiful line, Sequoia, from Laundry Basket Quilts, the Andover line. It's gorgeous. I mean, Andover has just gorgeous fabric, but we're using that line for the Northanger, quilts. So we'll be picking the next Jane Austen book coming up pretty soon. I'm not doing Pride and Prejudice yet. I think Pride and Prejudice will be like 2020. But we'll pick another book, and then we'll do Pride and Prejudice. We'll do Pride and Prejudice quilt along. So those are just, some things that are going on here. And then just getting used to the commute. Oh my God.
I bet.
That is not something I look forward to, I have to say.
I know, especially when you're used to having no commute,
Exactly. It's like just coming up with, and it's not like I haven't done this balance between, work and, work and the business. It's just that I have to find there's a new equilibrium somewhere, and I haven't found it yet. So.
Right. Okay, great. So people can head over to Lovebug Studios and check out the quilt along and your teaching engagements and all of those things, and figure out where to see you next and all of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And I want to make sure we get to your list. So you have a couple of cool things to recommend. The first one is a color app or game called Blendoku, which you said is really fun for testing your color sense.
Yeah. So this app, it's kind of like, it's like Tetris and a crossword puzzle and like this color app. So you're basically, what happens is you get like a pattern of squares. So let's say it's like a cross, right? And then they give you a selection of color graded squares that you are putting in color order. So it could be something where you're going from, like a really easy one would be going from a light purple to a dark purple, right? But as you get into the different levels of the game, it gets more complex, and you get more complex shapes to fill and multiple colors. So I think I'm up to a level where there's like 4 different gradients. Like it'll go from purple to teal to yellow to red. And like somehow you have to figure out like how to get these different gradient squares into the right order so that they're blended appropriately. And in some cases, like the colors are very close together. So it's fascinating and it's addicting. So
yeah,
I've been having fun like playing that.
It's probably good for like sharpening your color sense, right? Like it's almost like doing exercise, like it's exercises for that portion of your brain, which is probably good for you.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. And then the Robot Congress podcast. I've heard of a lot of podcasts. I have never heard of the Robot Congress podcast. So what is this about?
Yeah. So this is like, I think this is, this goes back to, to me, this is almost like where engineering and it's like where the engineering and the arts kind of intersect, again. But so what the hosts of the show do is, and why they call it Robot Congress is because it's like they explore issues in technology law. So technology moves faster than the law does. And so they explore different issues around things that are happening in technology and how we solve some of those challenges. So an example, and you're probably wondering like, why is that even fascinating? But they talk about like copyright and the impacts of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And so while they're not necessarily talking about quilting, law and quilting, there are some parallels that you can kind of draw. Like they went through. There's a lot of these copyright and trademark issues come up in gaming. So while I'm not a gamer myself, you can kind of draw some parallels to the quilting industry. Like I'm a pattern designer. And so we have, if you're distributing your patterns online and creating digital copies, when you sell that, you're licensing that copy to someone. So you're allowing them to, take that. So what happens if they create another copy in a different version, or if they're transferring it to a different computer, and the type of thing. So I love listening to that podcast just because I think the topic is very interesting about, how technology, how the law keeps up with technology or vice versa, or how we apply our sort of outdated laws. Because by the time you update the law, the technology has moved on. So it's one of those things where, we're sort of always behind. But what I find fascinating, and what I try to do a lot of times too, is like look to different industries to find parallels to the one that I'm in. Because you can sometimes get some ideas about how to approach different things. And so I posted the other day about that. There's a video that the Velcro company came out with to encourage people to stop calling hook and loop tape Velcro, so they can protect their trademark. And I actually heard about that video from Robot Congress. So I don't know if you had seen that video before.
Yes, I love that video. It's hilarious. And I never refer to Velcro. I always refer to it as hook and loop tape. Although when I wrote my book, they were very insistent about that. So I sort of already knew about it. But after watching that video, I was like, absolutely not. It will always be hook and loop tape. Because it's super brilliantly done and it's hilarious. They did a great job with it. But yeah, that sounds great. And I do also really love that idea of looking to other industries to sort of think through your own industry, especially in craft where, there's just not a lot of sort of serious research and journalism and law that's sort of applied to it. However much I wish there were. And so, I often, sort of as a journalist, look to the tech industry and, look at tech journalists and sort of see how they're doing their craft and think about how I can apply it to our industry. And so I've learned a lot that way. And so I really like that idea. And I do that all the time.
And I tell people a lot of times, like, yes, I own a business that is sort of quilting focused, but I actually own a publishing company and a technology company.
Yes. We all own technology companies. I mean, I do really approach it that way. I mean, I own a website. That's the way that I see it. It's like I own a website, and the website happens to be about this particular topic, but it's a website. And if I were to sell it, I'd be selling a website,
Right.
Absolutely. Well, Ebony, this has been super awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the While She Naps podcast.
Yeah, this was so fun. Like you said at the beginning, it's like I don't know if you said this at the beginning. Sorry.
Probably it was before we started recording, but yes.
I was like, wait a second. I think that came beforehand.
But what I always tell people before we start recording is that it's like we're sitting down for coffee.
Right. So that is actually what it felt like. I was like, oh wow, like I never get to see you in public.
Right, exactly. So
we
it's
never
like,
get to sort of sit down and have these kinds of conversations. So that's, so that's really fun. And I've kind of like, I've known you for, known in quotes, like I've known you for a while. We've never actually sat down and had a conversation. So
yeah, I know exactly, which is why I love having a podcast. So, because then I
it's
get
so
to
great.
call up all these people and just chat, which is
And just chat. Yeah.
I
Thank you
know.
so much for having me on.
Well, thank you. And you've been listening to the While She Naps podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Visit my blog, whileshenaps.com, where you can sign up for my email newsletter to get the best in sewing, blogging, and small business delivered right to your inbox each week. Today's episode was brought to you by Crosscut Sewing, located in Melrose, Massachusetts, or online at crosscutsewing.com. Crosscut offers fun and modern fabric for all of your sewing projects. In addition to quilting cotton, Crosscut offers a variety of apparel fabrics like denim, chambray, jersey knit, canvas, corduroy, flannel, and more. Use the code WSN18 to save 20% on your next fabric purchase. Thank you so much, Crosscut Sewing. And if you enjoy the show, tell a friend about it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.